червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей, гей, розвеселимо.
Vladimir Putin has fired the general charged with managing the Russian military's faltering logistics operations in Ukraine. Gen Dmitry Bulgakov, a deputy defense minister, was removed from his role on Saturday, the defense ministry said on Telegram. The ministry said the 67-year-old was released to transfer into a new role. He will be replaced by Col General Mikhail Mizintsev, who managed Moscow's brutal siege at the port city of Mariupol. Gen Bulgakov has run the military's logistics operations since 2008 and was responsible for keeping Russian troops supplied after their deployment to Syria in 2015. But observers say he has become sidelined in Moscow in recent months, with many blaming him for the chaotic logistics operations that have dogged Russia's advance and seen their troops left undersupplied. In recent months, the Kremlin has been forced to approach North Korea and Iran, two of its only remaining allies, for new artillery and drone supplies. Gen Bulgakov's dismissal comes as footage circulated on social media showing newly drafted Russian recruits being equipped with rusty assault rifles. Pro-war figures in Russia have welcomed his dismissal and the appointment of Gen Mizintsev, who was sanctioned by the UK for his role commanding the Mariupol siege, will likely be welcomed by hardliners. Gen Mizintsev, who was dubbed the Butcher of Mariupol by many Ukrainians, also led Russian forces in Syria and was accused of orchestrating a brutal bombing campaign that leveled the city of Aleppo. The UK Foreign Office said he had used reprehensible tactics and committed atrocities in both the Ukrainian and Syrian conflicts when announcing sanctions against the 60-year-old in March. Mr. Putin's personnel changes come amid reports that the Russian leader has taken personal charge of the war effort and has started issuing orders to generals in Ukraine himself. U.S. officials told CNN that the increasingly dysfunctional command structure in Moscow had forced Mr. Putin to take a more active role in the war. Last month, UK defense officials suggested that Mr. Putin had sidelined his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, after senior defense officials began to mock the top general's ineffectual and out-of-touch leadership. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported that Mr. Putin had denied his commanders permission to retreat from the southern city of Kherson, where Ukrainian troops are slowly advancing. Citing U.S. intelligence sources, the paper said that his refusal to consider a pullback had caused a decrease in morale among Russian troops in the city, who are largely cut off from their supply lines and rely on a series of pontoon bridges to be re-equipped. Russian authorities have begun rounding up the first of 300,000 draftees the Kremlin hopes will make good the steep losses, 80,000 or more dead and wounded, the Russian army has suffered in the first 7 months of its wider war in Ukraine. On paper, 300,000 new recruits is a lot of new recruits. The Russian army went to war in Ukraine with just 900,000 active troops on its rolls, after all. But the current mobilization, even if it goes smoothly, and it be clear, it won't, almost certainly can't produce much in the way of offensive combat power. Leaving aside the terrible quality of these draftees, they're older and less fit than any army would prefer, as well as the Russian army's shortage of experienced officers and sergeants to lead them and modern weaponry to arm them. There's the truck problem. The Russian army months ago ran out of reliable supply trucks. Lacking trucks, the army is tethered to its railheads. The best the Kremlin can hope for, as far as mobilization outcomes go, is to bulk up existing battalions with a lot of under-trained, poorly armed draftees who might be able to sit in a trench not far from a rail depot and inaccurately shoot at any Ukrainian forces attacking them, but who lack any ability to conduct attacks of their own. Attacks the Russian army's battered logistical brigades simply could not sustain. The Russian army had too few trucks even before the war. Just 11 logistical brigades, each with around 400 trucks, supported the whole frontline force. Not all of those brigades were fully staffed. Not all their trucks were in working order. The brigades also heavily depended on assistance from less than highly motivated civilian contractors. The fragility of the army's trucking infrastructure makes sense when you consider the Kremlin's traditional reliance on railroads for military logistics. It's custom in the Russian military for almost all supplies to move on trains. The logistical brigade's main job is to draw supplies from rail depots and shuttle them by road to frontline forces. The train-based logistics in turn make sense when you consider what the Russian army traditionally does. 1. It defends Russia, a mission that doesn't require combat forces to travel very far from Russian infrastructure. 2. It executes Moscow's foreign policy along the country's borders. In plain English, it helps the Russian government bully former Soviet countries, Georgia, Moldova, Kazakhstan, the Baltic states, Ukraine. Small wars against weak countries along the Russian border also don't require Russian forces to travel far from their country's railheads. The truck shortage isn't a problem for the Russian army until it tries to advance deep into enemy territory. Which, of course, is exactly what the army tried to do when it launched a multi-pronged attack into Ukraine starting in late February. The assault on Kyiv in particular resulted in Russian brigades rolling 100 miles or more from the main railhead in Gomel, in Belarus. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you can be alerted to our next video. We'll see you again soon on Warzone.